Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host Jo Wheatley.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode where we are talking about evoking awareness in coaching conversations. Sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but it actually forms one of the ICF core coaching competencies. And it is also what clients pay for. So they pay to develop new awareness in themselves, and that awareness can lead them to a choice where they can take action and achieve what they want, making progress in their life or towards their goal. Now, we know that when it comes to coaching accreditations, people get a bit nervous and think, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this? So we're going to take some time today to talk through the core competency of evoking awareness. And we'll talk about what it is and how to demonstrate that in coaching conversations.
Yeah, and where this comes in, certainly with ICF accreditation, is you have to pass what they call a performance assessment. So, depending which route you take, at some point, somebody will assess the quality of your coaching. And in doing so, they use what we call markers. So, you will have ACC markers and PCC markers. And these are the core competencies of the ICF broken down, and there's a number of descriptors that show that you are demonstrating that competency. So they can be really helpful for essentially saying, when you do this, you're coaching to a good standard. And so when we think about evoking awareness, what we're looking specifically for is how you demonstrate that through your coaching practice in the relationship you have with your coaching client in a way that you can demonstrate that competency to somebody who is assessing your performance. As Jo said, when you hear the word assessment, you can get quite nervous, but actually, when you are coaching, you should be doing these things as a matter of course. So it isn't about putting on a show for your assessment. It's about how do you develop and nurture your coaching skills such that you do this all the time in your coaching, that it's just like breathing when you're with a client, that you go into that automatic skill that you've refined and developed through your course. And on our training courses, when we're in sessions observing our learner coaches, we use these markers to be able to support people to develop, and we provide feedback based around these markers. So they are a staple place to go for any coach, whether you're a learner coach or you're developing your own coaching practice.
Yeah, it's important as a coach to have awareness of the competency frameworks. I think of all of the different coaching bodies. And as you start to look at each of them, with the European Mentoring Coaching Council, the Association for Coaching, for example, as well as the ICF, you'll start to see the similarities across the coaching bodies and, getting feedback on your strengths in those areas and also the opportunities to grow and develop is a great opportunity to normalize as well what it is. I mean, I know if I know I'm being recorded, I am not the same as when I am not being recorded. I'm not because that is going on. So if you're going through the ICF framework, you will have support through mentor coaching, and that is about giving you feedback on these different core coaching competencies. So let's break it down into different indicators. So the first indicator for evoking awareness is that the coach asks questions about the client. So they'll ask questions around the way that they think. They'll ask questions around how they feel, what their values are, what their needs are, what their wants, their beliefs, or their behavior. Now, Zoe and I often talk about core pillars of coaching as values, beliefs, emotions, goals. And you can see these words here, obviously, in that first indicator. So, it's giving you pointers as to what's different between any conversation you have in your day-to-day life and what actually makes a coaching conversation, and making sure that your questions are covering all of these key areas and aren't just focusing in on one of them.
Absolutely. And we know from experience of doing our emotions coaching practitioner training that emotions tends to be the place where coaches forget to explore, or maybe they don't forget to explore, but they don't actually lean into those conversations when they're introduced. So it's an important part to pay attention to. And that is also about having awareness of perhaps your preferences. So if you are somebody who is led by your emotions, you may ask lots of feeling-based questions. Or if you're someone who's led by analytics and data, you may ask lots of thinking-based questions or evidence-based questions. And what we're looking for here in evoking awareness is, do you have the flexibility to both match your client's style? So when your client is bringing emotions into the topic, that you're able to flex and adapt your language and your preferences to meet your clients. And sometimes it can also be about mismatching. So, how do you lead your client towards the outcome of their goal? But if they are perhaps stuck in data, so you may hear somebody saying, well, I don't know how to do it. I haven't got the information that I need, or they may just be sort of leveraging in that thinking space and they're stuck there. How do you, as a coach, use your language to be able to help your clients access different perspectives and open up different windows for them to go into? So that is all about evoking awareness, helping your clients to navigate different perspectives to bring new information and choices forward.
And if you're somebody that's already familiar with the GROW model, this first indicator is really about the R section, the client's current reality. So what are they currently thinking about their situation and their goal? What are they currently feeling about it? How is it? The values piece is really questions around how important is this for you? What, when you achieve this, what value is that going to honor? So something that is a must have and non-negotiable for them. And we know that when our learners do the values week, like the facilitators like, oh, I love this week, because the learners love it. And the learners, when they are practicing their coaching with their clients as well, they love getting to that. The clients always really enjoy the values piece of work, because it really is about what makes the client uniquely them.
Mm.
And it really gives them their roadmap. So you've covered that bit then as the coach, asking a range of questions about their current reality, making sure that if the client is stuck in one area, that you're asking questions just to help broaden out their understanding of what it's really like for them now. And then you start to move into asking questions to help them explore beyond that into new kind of expanded ways of thinking or feeling about themselves, actually. So with the ICF, they differentiate between what they call the who, which is the client, and the what, which is the situation.
Yeah, and I think this is really important, because when we train our coaches, we always talk about don't coach the story, and I think this is where these indicators can be really helpful. So when we talk about the who, we're obviously talking about the impact as a person. I think you illustrated that earlier, Joe. It's like, why is this important to you right now? What's the impact that's going to have on you? Where else in your life will you benefit from exploring this area? What are you learning about yourself? So it's those sorts of things where it's person based. And then when we're talking about the what, which is situation based, we do need to be careful not to delve into the story, the then what happened, and then what did they say, and what did you say? Like, that's not evoking awareness. That's just repeating information that the client already has. Evoking awareness will be some of those things that we mentioned before around, so what do you think about this situation? How do you feel about this situation? What would you like to have happen? How would you like to feel? What are some of the things that are coming up for you as we talk about this topic? So you're really zoning in on the situation, but through the lens of what is going on for the client in relation to the situation.
Yeah, sometimes I think as coaches, when you look at the criteria, for example, for evokes awareness, there are 8 different indicators, but actually 3 of the indicators. So the first indicator is about what does the client think, feel, and how are they behaving in their current reality, essentially. Then you've got 3 which are about helping the client to explore beyond that. So it's about themselves, it's about the situation, and it's also around the outcome. So that's half of those indicators covered if you've just inquired into thinking, feeling, their beliefs about it, why it's important to them, and how will it impact their behavior. So then as you start to kind of get into these indicators, you're thinking, actually, I can do that, or I already do that, or I know how I can do that. So you're halfway there.
Yeah. And then comes your coaching skills and your core coaching skills. So the next indicator is about sharing with no attachment, observations, intuitions, comments, thoughts, or feelings, and invites the client's exploration through verbal or tonal invitation. And what that essentially means is you're using yourself as a coaching tool here. So where your client is exploring all the different thoughts and feelings and the impact that Joe's explored there, you're listening out. Are there any patterns in their language? Are there any incongruencies between what you're hearing in this session and perhaps what the client has said in previous sessions? What's happening with the client's body language? Are you noticing any energy shifts? And so where you do, you may step in and say, oh, do you mind if I share an observation with you? Or would it be useful if I shared an observation with you? And clients typically always say yes, unless they're in sort of mid-flow and following a lead. And you share without attachment. What I think I noticed there as you were saying X, Y, and Z is your skin flushed. And I'm wondering if there's a significance to that. Or you might say, in the last session, you really talked about the importance of freedom to you, whereas what I'm hearing you talk about now is something that I'm sensing contradicts that. What do you think about that? And the no attachment piece is really important, because you're not saying this is a fact and I've seen it and I know it. You're saying, I think I've noticed this, but this is your session and these are your goals. Like, what do you think? So you're offering information to the client. And if they say, oh, no, it's not that, you let it go, because, as we said, it's the client's information. Typically, what happens when you share an observation and a client doesn't see themselves in it is it ignites more awareness anyway. And they say, no, it's not that, but it's blah, 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 blah. So yeah, sharing yourself as a coaching tool is a big part of coaching.
Yeah, and that also can be you as the coach saying, I noticed a strong feeling come up in me when you were talking about that. And I'm wondering if it might be useful to share it with you. I'm not sure if it's mine or yours. Client says yes. And you say, when you were talking about that, I felt a real tenseness across my chest. And the client might say, that's how I feel. That's how I feel all the time. And so they may not have been able to articulate that or even noticed it or thought it was related to what they were talking about, but all of a sudden it kind of becomes clear for them. Or they might say, no, I don't, well, no, I like that doesn't mean anything to me. And then you as the coach might say, I wonder whether it's my hay fever, or maybe it's, maybe it's something completely different. So it's not only sharing observations in relation to what the client has said, but also your experience. If you're having an experience that you don't normally have, and it really stands out to you as being distinct and based on that conversation, then you might ask permission to share it. So that's a bit more advanced than the first example, but it's certainly a skill to develop.
And to be able to do that, you need to make contact with the other core competencies. You have to be very grounded when you come into your sessions and very clean in your own energy, so that you aren't carrying your own stuff through to the session, because obviously that can interrupt that data exchange, I suppose you could call it.
It really depends on your relationship with the client as well. You'll have a sense of what the client finds useful as you spend more time together, and the degree of like lightheartedness, how easy it is to share something and for it to be received in a non-attached way. And you'll know that from the relationship. If your client is somebody that is still at the point in their coaching journey where they're paying very high regard to what you as the coach says, versus a client that is kind of quite assured in themselves and their own experiences and is able to kind of easily kind of dismiss something, and it is a very natural flow. So that's something to be mindful of as well.
You might hear your client saying things like, oh, you're so right. Oh, that was such a good idea. Those are little things to watch out for when you might need to hold back on your own observations in exchange for those of the clients.
Yeah.
But the next indicator, you won't be surprised to hear this come in, is about asking clear, direct, and primarily open-ended questions one at a time at a pace that allows for thinking, feeling, or reflection by the client. And I remember when I did my coach mentoring that we were challenged to ask questions with less than, I think it was like 7 words or something, which was really hard. And I know in my coaching sessions, I do have a habit of sharing an observation and that rolling into a question. And these things would be picked up in my performance assessment. So what this means is, when you ask a question, once that question has left your lips, stop talking and let the client have some space to answer it. What we see in learner coaches are what we call lots of double-barreled questions. Like, I was wondering what you thought about that. And actually, I'm wondering also if you have any feelings associated with that. And as you think about that, how important is that to you? And it's like, whoa, how is a client supposed to be able to process and answer that? And if you do that, it's not the end of the world because the client will pick the question which is most relevant to you. But best practice is to be able to slow your coaching down, ask a question, leave it in the space, and give your client plenty of time and space to be able to answer that. And you do not have to have the next question ready to go. And I see this a lot again in learner coaches as they're thinking ahead of like, oh gosh, what shall I ask next? What shall I ask next? It's absolutely fine if your client answers a question, you pause and your client pause for you to come up with your next question, because the question needs to respond to what the client has just said, not the track that you're necessarily on, thinking about where the session may or may not be going.
I think what's really interesting with the mental coaching is that typically you'll have, so when you're in the group phases of it, so you generally have like 7 hours of group coaching and 3 hours of one-to-one, sorry, not coaching, mental coaching. So 7 hours of group mental coaching and 3 hours of one-to-one. And so somebody will coach, somebody will be client, and then there'll be feedback. The coach will give feedback, the client will give feedback, and then the observers, so the rest of the group that weren't involved in that, will also give feedback, something they thought they did well and something that they think is an area for development. And the feedback always varies. So the group are learning about the core competencies and developing their understanding of it. And that will show in the feedback that's given. And you also have the mentor coach then that gives their overall feedback, like as the reference point. How much silence to hold is very much a matter of debate in mentor coaching feedback, because some clients need or want, or sometimes want to have a lot of space, and at other times holding it feels like it's arbitrary and it can start to kind of break that rapport. So it is really nuanced. You don't need to overly, worry about that or be concerned about it, but it is something to just notice. What is your tendency? And how do you make those decisions with each and every client? What have you contracted for? What do you know about the amount of time that they need to reflect and answer questions? And that can be a useful thing to cover with them in contracting. So that's 6 of the indicators. The 7th indicator is actually an extension of that one we were just talking about. So it's that the coach uses language that is generally clear and concise. And this is referring really to the fact that many of us overcomplicate things. So questions such as, and what impact is that having on you, is a clear and concise question. If instead the coach said, oh, you've shared a lot with me about that, and I'm just wondering, when you said that, what impact is that having on you? It doesn't have the clarity. It's not concise. And this refers to the final competency, so overlaps into that as well, which is that the coach allows the client to do most of the talking. So if you're asking that first version of the question, what impact is that having on you? You already know that by the client answering that, they're more likely to be taking longer than the question that you've asked. So the balance of the session is going to be much more the client talking, and not just the talking, but they're processing in answering it. They're processing their relationship to what it is that they brought to the session and all of the elements within that. And there is software available now that will monitor the percentage of the time that the coach is talking and the client is talking. And that might be something that is useful to tap into as you're developing it. And so when you're doing your coaching training or you're in the session, just have it in the back of your mind. One of those questions you just check in with yourself every so often. Who's doing more talking here, me or the client? Mm-hmm. And if you notice it's you might choose to share that with your client. I'm noticing that I'm doing a lot of the talking here. How are you finding that? What impact is that having on you? What's happening in, between us? Or maybe you don't share that and inquire around that, but instead you just start to adjust, the questions that you're asking. You hold the silence for longer. You might start to think, wonder why the client's giving me quite short answers. You might give some feedback around that, or maybe you start to adjust the questions. So if we go back up to the first indicator where you're asking questions about thinking, feeling, behavior, beliefs, values, perhaps you've started to get stuck in a particular area, which is where the client is stuck. So what would be some alternative questions where you could start to shift the focus, and maybe the client has more to share, or there's more new insights that they will get from that particular area, and that will enable them then to do most of the talking.
I think the thing to remember as we go through this is there is no perfect coach.
No.
So you can have your performance assessment and you can bring in a number of unhelpful habits, because when you're looking at a PCC standard of coaching, you actually only need to meet 50% of the indicators in each of the competency buckets. So we've given you 8 to pass. You'd need to hit 4 in that particular section. You want to aim to obviously hit more than that, because that's obviously great standard of coaching. But we're all different. We all coach in different ways. I remember our coach mentor saying something along the lines of, there are things that you have to do as a coach. So you have to be ethical. It has to be non-directive. Everything else is style. So you could be a very action orientated coach, or you could be a very exploratory based coach. Neither is right nor wrong. It's about style. And, different clients will seek out different kinds of coaches. So we hope that that brings to life that competency for you around evokes awareness. And within the other coaching bodies, there are similar ones. So the EMCC, for example, is ignites insight and awareness. And you'll see similar in the Association for Coaching as well. So hopefully this has been a great resource for you.
And remember that you aren't assessed on the progress that the client makes in the session. You're only assessed against demonstrating these particular coaching competencies. So that can help, I think, to take some of the pressure off, because clients are, ready at different times for different progress. You can't really predict when they'll have their aha moments. So, getting into the discipline of understanding and demonstrating the competencies will naturally lead to the clients making progress, but focus on demonstrating the competencies first, the thing that you're most in control of.
So if you've enjoyed today's podcast, please do rate and subscribe the podcast. If you haven't done so yet, and you can where you're listening, please leave us a review. We always love to receive a bit of podcast love. So thanks very much.